sitting president. I do want to continue this conversation here on Live Now from Fox and discuss what we learned today in terms of the jury being seated by former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani, friend of the program. Thank you again for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. How important was the jury selection in this case for Hunter Biden?
Andy, it is extremely important because it is a very difficult case for Hunter Biden to defend. I don't think there's any way he's going to get an acquittal because there's so many damaging admissions and text messages and independent witnesses that are going to talk about Hunter Biden's drug use and addiction. The best bet he's going to have is maybe a hung jury, a sympathetic juror or two that deadlock the panel and cause a mistrial or potential jury nullification. Because if you're looking at a defense on the merits, for Hunter Biden to credibly argue that he wasn't addicted to drugs, specifically crack cocaine, at the time he purchased his firearm, that's not a defensible case, in my opinion.
And you mentioned potentially some sympathetic jurors there as well, and there were 6 men, 6 women here on this juror, and some of the reports coming out of different jurors, they're having connections to people that have had drug addictions or different gun charges as well. In terms of that, how would you go about kind of the jury and picking the people on the jury, and how much may that be a factor if they have some connection, not necessarily to Hunter Biden and his addiction, but to other people with drug addiction?
You know, drugs are very interesting, and I prosecuted a lot of drug cases, drug trafficking cases. But when it comes to drug use, you have folks on both sides. You have people that think that drug use is such a huge public health problem, but really it's a criminal problem, and no one should be using drugs, and those who use drugs should be incarcerated. Other people actually have sympathy for drug users, and they understand addiction, and they may be sympathetic to someone like Hunter Biden, who's been very open with his addiction. Obviously, if you're the defense, you want those sympathetic jurors, and if you're the prosecution, you want jurors who can set aside those sympathies and follow the law and judge this case solely based on the facts and the jury instructions as given by Judge Norika, which really says you have to decide the case without any sympathy. And was Hunter Biden a user or an addict at or near the time of this firearms purchase?
Yeah, and we're going to obviously contrast it with what happened over the last month with the former president, the conviction there, and some of the similarities just based on the case and based on the legalities, because there was a little bit of a different questionnaire for the jurors there during that case in Manhattan. Is there a different questionnaire? Was there a different questionnaire for this case, especially since it's revolving around the son of a sitting president?
Different questionnaire, but there is that same political layer, and Donald Trump came up a lot during jury selection today. Jurors were asked about their views of the former president, and there were some jurors that said that he was treated unfairly and then some very pro-Trump views. They were excused from the panel. You also had some jurors who had some very anti-gun views that think that firearms should be banned, period. No one should own them, and they're responsible for mass shootings and school shootings. Those types of jurors were excluded. You want folks that can be fair and impartial, but Delaware is a very small state, Wilmington even smaller, and you have a lot of jurors on this panel that know the Bidens. Some have served the Bidens, for instance. One was a bartender. One juror knew about the plea agreement that was essentially ripped up and we had to start all over. And you know, when you're analyzing this case, Andy, I really think this is a case that isn't a good trial case, but maybe, just maybe, Hunter Biden's lawyers have a chance on appeal, and this is why. The judge already said that the plea agreement, the original one that they walked away from, is not enforceable. And I think that was a huge tactical mistake by Hunter Biden's defense team. It was a sweetheart deal. They should have taken it. They got greedy. And what happened there was when the judge was asking, you know, are the parties in agreement? The defense said this agreement covers all potential criminal investigations into Hunter Biden. Well, it didn't, and it couldn't, and this is why. At the time, David Weiss was just the U.S. attorney in Delaware. He didn't have jurisdiction over potential Foreign Agent Registration Act or FARA violations in D.C. or tax crimes in California. So when he got up and said, yeah, this covers everything, the prosecution said, no, it doesn't. And the judge said, well, there's no meeting of the minds here. You guys aren't agreeing. And instead of taking that sweetheart deal, that felony diversion that was offered, the defense walked away from it. And I can tell you, I put more than 1,000 people in federal prison, and never once did I give federal diversion to anyone. It is a very good deal. It was a slap on the wrist. And Now that it's been blown up, of course, the defense wants it back. The trial judge said no, but there's a possibility that an appellate court disagrees and does side with Hunter Biden on appeal if and when he's going to be convicted.
That would be certainly wild and great insight there to this case based on your experience. And like you said, it was a trial that almost never came to be. And now here we are just days away on the eve of opening statements. Let's get into what we're going to hear over the course of this trial, because you also mentioned just some of the revealing details that Hunter Biden has talked about himself in his memoir as well. How damning is that evidence, and how much will they kind of lean into it, the prosecution, during this trial?
Andy, it will be very embarrassing for Hunter Biden and his family. And we talked about some of the scandalous details that came out during the Trump trial, but this is going to be even worse. We're going to hear about crack cocaine and escorts and prostitutes and, of course, that infamous laptop. And these are folks directly connected to Hunter Biden that are going to testify against him. His ex-wife, his ex-girlfriend, who actually discarded the firearm, the mother of his child. These are people that are in Hunter Biden's inner circle that are going to testify about his very significant crack cocaine addiction. And it's really Hunter Biden's own words, though, Andy, that I think are going to come back to haunt him. He wrote a memoir about this. There were text messages to drug dealers. Literally, like a day after he filled these forms out, these ATF forms, saying that he wasn't a user or a drug addict. So I think between those own messages, Hunter Biden's own words, he's publicly stated in court that he was a recovering addict and he went through a rehab program that lasted 11 days. I don't think he's going to be able to credibly argue that he believed genuinely that he wasn't a user or addict when he filled out those forms and purchased his firearms. That's really the only defense here, but I don't think the jury is going to buy it.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the embarrassing moments, potentially some of the scandalous, both text messages there as well. And just to continue to kind of look back at the Trump trial, and we talked about maybe the line that was crossed during that trial with Stormy Daniels, some of the testimony, Michael Cohen, some of the testimony as well. How fine of a line is that? And is this line a little bit blurrier based on what we saw last week? And could this be some embarrassing moments for Hunter Biden?
I do think the line was crossed in the Trump case. It really wasn't relevant to the charges in the case. False business records. We're talking about Stormy Daniels and sexual positions and use of a condom. I think it is more relevant here because really we're talking about, was Hunter Biden a drug addict? So it's directly relevant to the charges in the case. I don't think the defense is going to admit it because really there's no other way to defend this case. He obviously filled out the forms. They may argue that the forms were doctored. I don't think that's going to go too far with the jury. He clearly had the firearm, and his girlfriend discarded it in a dumpster. So I think the possession won't be challenged. So it's really that addiction at or near the time. And all of this is relevant. Who he was using drugs with, who he was partying with. We've all seen the videos of him naked, holding guns, with drugs there. And I think all of these really sordid details are going to come out at trial, Andy.
Yeah, it's going to be very kind of, we'll have to keep an eye on all of these because obviously it impacts all of the political realm as well, talking about this. But opening statements taking place tomorrow. And we had some legal experts over the weekend discussing this and the verbiage of this form. How much will that be argued in court about him being an addict but not using drugs on the day necessarily he signed the form? Will that be a point of contention?
I know the defense asked for it, saying he had to use drugs on the very day, but that's not the law. It's really a reasonable time period when the form is filled out. The defense is trying to take a very narrow view, of what a drug user or a drug addict is, and that's just not the law. It's really a reasonable time period. So I think the prosecution and the judge got it right. I think the defense, again, a little bit of a Hail Mary here. We talked about potentially getting the original plea deal enforced. I think they also really want to attack the constitutionality of this statute. The irony is there are some conservative judges appointed by Donald Trump, no less, in the Fifth Circuit that have ruled that this statute is actually unconstitutional as applied to former addicts. This is the Daniels case in the Fifth Circuit. So there's a lot of pro-gun right, Second Amendment advocates that don't like this law, and obviously they tend to lean conservative, but those conservative judges and advocates may actually help Hunter Biden. Now, the judges ruled against this argument, but maybe, just maybe, it's something that an appellate court will look at. And even if they don't, there will be a circuit split. So maybe this case ends up all the way before the Supreme Court on the gun rights issue.
All right, that is going to be something we follow as well. And it's very interesting as we talk to you about maybe a little bit of the political overlay of this case, overshadowing a lot of this, but the rule of law was followed during the Trump trial and will likely be followed again. So we'll get into kind of the nitty-gritty with you most days here on Live Now from Fox. All right, Neama, thank you again for providing such great insight here on Live Now from Fox.
Of course, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Of course.